the early 90s, I was a visual effects art director. That was when I worked in special effects. But after 95, what I really have been is a conceptual designer. So I kind of made a break from visual effects in 95, and even though I still have the vocabulary and I have the kind of systems understanding, I'm really a conceptual designer, is what I've been doing for the last 15 years. I'm primarily tapped to do mechanical design because that's an area that I have a certain kind of I guess, aesthetic understanding of, and I think that the designs that I've created have a certain kind of, they're grounded in a certain kind of visual reality, but they're also kind of characters, if you will. Like in Avatar, you know, the vehicles, especially the dragon, which is this large flying vehicle that has these 4 large propellers, it plays a specific kind of role in the narrative. It's not just a vehicle, but it's a vehicle that is a narrative character. It has a role to play in the film. You know, it's this almost like a kind of omnipresent destructive force that is ultimately what brings down the home tree. So when I approach these designs, I usually look at them from a technical standpoint with regards to giving them an authentic feel. But when I look at how the shapes work and the kind of decisions I make in regards to what kinds of, you know, shapes and what kinds of design elements are going to play, it really is about their role in the film as a character. So my designs, I think, are really really serve the narrative of the director's vision. They're really there to serve the director's storytelling capacity, as opposed to just being technically accurate. Well, as a child, my father was a university professor, and he was a fine artist. He taught printmaking. And his perspective on the arts was that a grounding in our history and a good studio practice meaning you get in there and do work every day, was how creatives and artists were going to be able to make a mark for themselves. So that was the way I was raised. So I think that, you know, as I grew older, I had, you know, inherited this kind of work ethic, and then that work ethic went on to serve me extremely well as I moved through graduate school and ultimately into Hollywood, because if you've worked in Hollywood, and you well know, that the work ethic is extremely important. I mean, you'll never find a harder working group of people than people that work set, people that are working in the cinema. And I had this long-standing passion about cinema. I had wanted to direct and make short films and so forth, but the universities I attended in undergrad didn't have those programs. So I did shoot Super 8 like so many of us did, and I did make small, you know, kind of narrative films outside the family, you know, kind of home movies. I did get my friends to drive cars and act and do things, but it just amounted to having, you know, in my mind, expensive, inferior little shorts that didn't really seem to me to connect to the great films of Hollywood, like that I was in love with, The Godfather and 2001. It's pretty hard to make the connection between those films and Super 8. But I used the tool and I enjoyed it. That really invigorated in me somehow that idea of capturing images in time and being able to do crude editing really reinvigorated my interest in Hollywood. So by the time I finished my MFA, I decided, well, I'll take a couple of years and I'll just focus my efforts on finding a way to get into something to do with the Hollywood system. And I had been a huge fan of visual effects going back to 2001, which is a huge touchstone picture for me. And then again with Close Encounters and of course Star Wars. And I could see in the publications of that time that a lot of what was being done in those worlds of special effects, in those spheres of creation, were really skills that I thought I could get a hold of. You know, model building, matte painting, designing spaceships and robots and memorable kinds of fantasy characters. And because I had been drawing for so many years and had been involved in this studio practice for such a long time, and I did some architectural model building in the early 80s as well, I thought, well, I could comb all this material together and create a portfolio that might capture the attention or turn the head of people that were doing visual effects, because it seemed like a logical extension of where I was at. So I put together a portfolio and I started networking. I have the real story in my past of networking, talking to everyone I could in Dallas, which was way far from Hollywood. And eventually somebody said they knew somebody who was possibly involved in Lucasfilm, and there was some vague connection. And I worked those connections and finally got somebody who said he would carry my portfolio to a meeting at Industrial Light and Magic in 1989. And so I made this package and container and put my best foot forward. And through his carrying my work there at that time, I was able to leverage an interview. And then through a phone call and just, really pressuring Warren Franklin was the head of ILM at the time to allow me to have an interview. He said, well, if you show up here, you can meet with the head of the model shop. And so I bought an airline ticket and flew out and pushed my way into an interview, and that led to another interview, and then I just moved. I've worked with, Guillermo del Toro is somebody I've worked on 5 pictures with, and he actually is the person that snatched me away from Industrial Light and Magic. He really opened the door for my career in Hollywood, and he's been a huge promoter of me. So I'm always just tickled, whenever I hear the phone ring and it's him on the line, and I will always be available and will always be quick to assist him in all of his cinematic endeavors because he and I share a kind of understanding of the process that is really enjoyable for me. I can work in very short little, shorthand drawings because he knows what I will bring after the decisions are made. So it's a very spontaneous and enjoyable work process with him. Of course, with Jim Cameron, there's a scope to his work. His films, have a certain kind of gravitas that's very intoxicating to work, to be a part of. And, he's another person that has given me opportunity to really participate on a grand scale on projects that are just, so extraordinarily unique, one of a kind. I mean, Avatar is really on a scale that is singular, and to be able to play a part in such an extravaganza is really exciting in a different way than the more intimate kind of relationships that relationship I have with Del Toro. Yeah. So many of my designs, at the moment I did them, they were kind of in their own way sort of perfect. Hellboy's gun, the Samaritan, was done specifically for Ron Perlman, and I had met Ron Perlman, and I worked on the design with a specific scale in mind, and I cut it out of foam core, and Ron came in and held it, and it really proved to be just kind of this perfect little object, but that's a tiny object in comparison to the amp suit, which is a huge, character once again that Quaritch gets into, and it services the story in this big dynamic way, and it was extremely complicated to design, and Jim it really pushed me, and we worked together and really developed something that's extraordinary, and so that's kind of perfect in its own way. And if I look back in the Star Wars stuff on the special edition, I did a couple of little vehicles and things that show up there, and for me, that the fact that they're connected to that legacy picture, something that impacted me so much as a young person, that's kind of perfect. So I try to look at it all in terms of my own evolutionary journey, and at each kind of step along the way, I created something that was sort of perfect for that day and on that particular altitude, if you will, through time. And so I kind of like to leave it like that. I've had this kind of cadence of stuff that I'm really not only proud of, but I feel was I think it was really close to, if not right on the mark, with regards to what the director had hoped for.